The first time the Koru saw a human die, they laughed. Not because the death was clean. Koru didn't care for clean. Their wars had carved galaxies into ribbons of burning stone. They laughed because of how long it took. The human had been cut open, organs failing, blood pumping out in sticky waves, yet still it crawled forward through the dust. Hands shaking. Eyes feral. Every second of its dying stretched into a stubborn crawl the Koru found ridiculous. Pathetic, one of them hissed. See how fragile their shells are? Their bones snap like reeds. Another nudged the twitching body with the tip of a blade, as if testing whether it would finally collapse. But the human did not stop. Its breath gurgled. Its arm dragged forward another inch. And another. As if there were something just beyond reach it refused to leave behind. The Koru laughed harder. They did not laugh for long. Because when the next human was captured, it bared its teeth and whispered something guttural, something raw. The translator rendered it crudely, "Keep laughing." The Koru didn't know what to make of that. They knew war. They knew slaughter. They knew prey that screamed, begged, cursed. But they did not know prey that invited pain like a dare. So they tested it. They tore at the next human slower, savoring each break, each flinch. The human broke, but not the way they expected. It screamed, yes, but the scream carried no surrender. It carried a rhythm. It carried defiance. And when the others heard it, they screamed too. Not fear. Not agony. But solidarity. The Koru paused. Their blades hovered. Something in the sound crawled under their scales. Humans were supposed to be weak. Thin skin. Soft tissue. Lives short and brittle as glass. They should have shattered. Yet every cut seemed to weld them tighter. That was the beginning of unease. It grew when the first battle report came back from the outer colonies. A Koru hunting pack had struck fast, cutting through airlocks, gassing tunnels, flooding in with fire and claws. The prey should have scattered, should have hidden. Instead, they fought with tools, with teeth, with broken pipes in their hands. They fought until their arms no longer lifted, and even then, they threw themselves into the fire to drag hunters down with them. One pack leader reported, "They don't fear pain. They use it." Command dismissed it as exaggeration. Every predator claimed their prey fought hardest when cornered. What made these skin apes different? The difference came at Karth's belt. There, in the mines, thousands of humans were trapped underground when the Koru collapsed the shafts. Perfect. Easy kill. The predators sealed the exits, waited for oxygen to thin. Waited for panic to bloom. But no panic came. Hours stretched. Days. Instead of silence, strange sounds began to seep up through the stone. A thudding rhythm. Voices rising together. Singing. The humans sang in the dark. The miners who crawled out 3 days later were burned, starved, half-blind from dust, but alive. They carried each other on backs and shoulders, dragging even the dead so none would be left behind. And when the Koru closed in for the slaughter, those half-dead miners fought like demons. They should have fallen in moments. Instead, they chewed through armored hides with scavenged drills and shattered helmets. When they finally collapsed, it was over a mound of predator corpses. That was when the whispers began. The Koru were not a fearful people. Fear was weakness. Yet commanders noticed how soldiers stiffened at the sight of human prisoners. How the laughter was quieter now. And one question began gnawing through the ranks. What kind of prey grows stronger the more you hurt it? The answer came too late. Because humans began to understand too. They began to realize what the Koru had not. Pain was not the end of them. Pain was ignition. One soldier's scream was a beacon. A dying miner's crawl was a lesson. A shattered arm became a weapon. The Koru began to lose battles they should have won. Not because humans were faster, or sharper, or more evolved. But because the humans refused to die when logic demanded it. The breaking point came when the predators tried something new. They captured an entire regiment, caged them in the belly of a warship, and decided to break them all at once. No claws. No fire. Just unending torment. The cages were flooded with heat. Starvation set in. Water dripped in cruel measures. Every hour, a human was dragged out and butchered in front of the others. The Koru expected wails. Despair. Collapse. Instead, they saw something else. When one human broke a bone against the bars, the others did not recoil. They leaned closer. They watched. They learned. When one human was flayed alive, the others did not beg for mercy. They memorized how long it took him to die. They counted every breath. And when the predators realized what they were witnessing, it was already too late. Because the humans were not breaking. They were adapting. The cages filled with whispers. With rhythm. With muttered promises that made no sense to alien ears. Until one night, the whispers fell silent all at once. And in that silence, something shifted. The Koru guarding the chamber looked at each other uneasily. Then the sound came. A single, steady voice. Rough. Broken. But rising. It spoke words the translator stuttered to process, the cadence jagged yet unstoppable. We don't stop. The others joined in, their voices colliding, sharpening, forging into a chant that shook the steel. We don't stop. We don't stop. We don't stop. The guards backed away. And the ship shuddered. Because the humans had already begun breaking through the cages with their bare, bleeding hands. The Koru realized, with a creeping horror, that pain was not a chain on these creatures. It was a key. And they had given it to them. The guards screamed for reinforcements. But by the time they arrived, the cages were empty. The humans were gone. And the chanting still echoed through the hall. The warship was supposed to be untouchable. Black Iron Hull. 10,000 Koru aboard. A fortress drifting through the void. Yet when the alarms blared, it wasn't enemy fleets outside. It was something inside. The humans had vanished into the guts of the ship. The predators scoured the corridors, their armored claws scraping the walls, heat sensors tuned to the faintest spark of life. They expected cornered prey. They expected terror. Instead, they found silence. Not the silence of hiding. The silence of something waiting. The first patrol never returned. Their signals winked out in the maintenance decks, comms filled only with static and faint wet sounds. When a second team found the remains, The corpses were unrecognizable. Not killed cleanly. Pulled apart. Weapons missing. How? A commander snarled. They are unarmed. But they weren't. Not anymore. The humans had carved weapons out of steel pipes, stripped wiring into garrotes, sharpened plating into blades. With every drop of blood they spilled, they learned the warship's insides like veins in their own hands. The Koru locked down whole levels. Sealed bulkheads. Flushed decks with fire. But it didn't matter. Hours later, a reactor conduit went dark. A gravity core flickered. Systems failed one by one, as though the ship itself were bleeding from within. Whispers spread. Soldiers glanced at shadows, claws twitching. Commanders barked orders, but their voices were thinner now. The word no one wanted to speak was already coiling through them, haunted. It wasn't superstition. It was worse. Because every corridor smelled of blood. Every silence felt like breath on their necks. And every time they dragged a human body into the light, it was broken but smiling. Why do they grin when they die? One soldier spat, claws trembling. No one answered. Hours stretched into days. Sleep frayed. The predators grew restless, claws clattering against armor, eyes darting at shadows. But the humans did not stop. Every attempt to crush them only scattered them deeper, into ducts and vents and maintenance shafts. The warship groaned like a beast with worms chewing inside it. The Koru were supposed to be hunters. But the more they hunted, the more prey they seemed to create. And something began to change in the soldiers. They started waking at phantom noises. They started jerking at every scrape, every creak. Some claimed they heard the chanting, faint, woven through the steel. We don't stop. At first it was dismissed as imagination. Then entire platoons swore they heard it, always from somewhere deeper in the hull, always just out of reach. The commander tried to rally them. He gathered his troops in the hangar, roaring speeches of dominance, demanding obedience. He promised they would root out the vermin, that the humans were nothing but meat and bone. The troops cheered, but the sound cracked. Because even as he shouted, another blackout swept across the ship, plunging them into darkness mid-roar. And in that darkness, faint and steady, the chant came again. We don't stop. The commander's voice faltered. That was when the sabotage grew bolder. Engines bucked. Ammunition stores detonated. A plasma furnace ruptured, killing hundreds. The ship's spine trembled. How do they know the systems? A technician demanded, voice shrill. They don't even understand this technology. But they did. Piece by piece, through blood and grit, they had learned. Because pain had taught them faster than manuals ever could. The commander finally ordered the purge. Flood every shaft with poison gas. Incinerate the hidden decks. No more games. They carried out the purge. Screams echoed through the vents, bodies blackened. The air stank of charred flesh. The soldiers waited, trembling, for silence to follow. But silence never came. Because hours later, as the ship limped toward a rendezvous, a voice crackled over the comms. Not a Koru voice. A human. You'll run out of fire before we run out of blood. The ship froze. Every predator in the command chamber went still. How did they access the comms? A lieutenant whispered. No one answered. The human's breathing rasped through the speakers. Then a low, broken laugh. "We don't stop," the commander roared, smashing a claw into the console. "Trace it. Find them." But the trace scattered. The humans were everywhere. Or nowhere. The next hours were chaos. More systems collapsed. The ship listed, hull groaning. The predators no longer roamed in packs of 5 or 10, but in dozens, clinging to each other for courage. Still, the attacks came. A soldier dragged into the dark mid-step. A lieutenant found strung from a rafter by his own armor straps. Corpses left like messages, jaws torn into crude grins. The commander tried to hold the line. Tried to convince himself and his soldiers that these were accidents of war, that humans weren't capable of this kind of precision. But then came the hangar doors. They cycled open on their own. The predators rushed to seal them, but it was too late. The void howled in, ripping soldiers into space. Dozens vanished, armor twisting in the pull, screams cut short. The survivors clung to bulkheads, shrieking. And above the chaos, through the roar of the vacuum, the chanting rose again. "We don't stop." The commander realized his warship was no longer a fortress. It was a tomb. He gave the order to abandon ship. The escape pods filled, soldiers clawing over each other, discipline breaking. Pride dissolved into panic. In the scramble, hundreds were trampled. The commander himself boarded last, glaring back at the burning wreck. His claws trembled, though he forced them still. "They will not follow," he hissed. "They cannot." The pod jettisoned. The warship dwindled behind them, shuddering with explosions, breaking apart. But even as the pods drifted free, the commander's gaze caught something that froze his blood. Shapes. Dozens of them. Humans. Clinging to the hull of the pods, armor stripped from Koru corpses, eyes burning through cracked visors. The predators screamed. Because the humans hadn't stayed behind to die. They had followed. And they were still whispering. "We don't stop." The escape pods drifted in silence, engines burning pale against the void. Inside, the Koru huddled in harnesses, armor still slick with sweat, claws twitching. They told themselves they had escaped. That the nightmare was behind them. But the hull groaned. Scratches echoed through the metal. Something moved outside. "Impossible," one soldier whispered. "No prey can survive the void." Yet the sound came again, fingers dragging across steel. A steady rhythm. Tap. 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 The commander barked for calm, but his voice cracked. He ordered external scans. The readings came back wrong. Dozens of heat signatures clinging to the pod's surface. Too faint to be alive. Too steady to be dead. Then the airlock lights flashed red. The first breach came silent, a section of the pod's hull peeling inward, metal screaming. A human forced its way through, face smeared with frozen blood, eyes bright with frost. Armor stolen from a corpse, chest caved but still moving. The soldiers shrieked. They tore it apart with claws and plasma fire, ripping the body into ash. But when it fell, another climbed in behind it. And another. The pod became a slaughterhouse. Predators clawed, fired, bled, yet the humans kept coming. crawling through smoke, dragging each other forward, silent except for the rasp of their breath. One soldier screamed, "They don't die," before a sharpened pipe ran through his throat. The commander rallied his warriors, forcing them into formation, cutting down the intruders in sprays of fire. But even as the last body fell, the damage was done. Blood everywhere. Armor shredded. Half the pod's crew gone. The commander stared at the corpses, chest heaving, and realized something colder than fear. The humans had not come to win. They had come to wound. They wanted the Koru to feel hunted. The survivors finally reached a Koru garrison world, slamming into the landing bays in broken pods. They stumbled out, trembling, armor cracked. Other warriors watched them with confusion, then with unease. Predators weren't supposed to look like that, wide-eyed, shaking, scarred with panic. When the commander gave his report, the council chamber erupted. Some scoffed, some snarled, but their voices quavered. Prey that sabotaged a warship? Prey that clung to escape pods? Prey that survived the void? Unthinkable. Yet the proof stood before them, broken soldiers whispering words no Koru should ever repeat. "We don't stop." The phrase spread. First as mockery. Then as murmurs. Then as nightmares. Because soon more reports came in. Outposts gutted. Garrisons turned inside out. Patrols found butchered in their own ships. Always the same trail, blood, silence, and whispers. The humans had learned to use pain as language. And the galaxy was starting to listen. At first, the Koru tried to erase it. Burned their own soldiers who spread the stories. Sealed records. Declared the humans nothing more than vermin. But suppression only fed the fire. Other species began to notice. Species long enslaved, long cowed under Koru claws. If weak, fragile humans could make predators bleed, what else was possible? The council panicked. They declared extermination. Not war. Not conquest. Extermination. Every fleet was ordered to burn human colonies to ash. No survivors. No witnesses. The campaign began with firestorms. Worlds turned black. Cities reduced to glass. The Koru laughed again, certain the nightmare was ending. But then came the survivors. They crawled out of rubble. Out of craters. Out of fire itself, skin seared, lungs ruined, still dragging each other forward. Entire platoons of Koru fell trying to finish them, because the humans would not lie down. One fleet commander reported that 1,000 humans with nothing but jagged metal held against an armored legion for 3 days. Not because they had a chance, but because they refused to die quietly. When the commander ordered orbital strikes, the screams carried through the calms. Not screams of terror. Screams like war drums. The predators silenced the transmission. But they could not silence the echo. Soon fleets hesitated. Soldiers lingered before striking. Because every time they killed humans, they lost more of themselves. Koru pride had been built on dominance. But what does dominance mean when your prey welcomes pain? When killing them does not bring silence, but more defiance? Something began to crack. In the slave pits of the Koru, whispers spread. The frail apes were fighting back. The frail apes would not stop. For the first time in centuries, the enslaved dared to dream. And the Koru began to feel something alien to them. Something colder than defeat. Doubt. It showed first in the soldiers. Hardened hunters waking with shivers. Claws shaking before battle. Some refused to fight altogether, terrified of facing prey that would not break. The council called it weakness. They purged deserters. But purges didn't stop the whispers. The fear spread anyway. One night, in the fortress spires of the capital, a high predator awoke to silence. Too much silence. His guards were gone. The halls empty. And from the shadows of his own chamber, he heard it. We don't stop. He lunged with claws drawn, but struck only air. The shadows mocked him with the rhythm, with breath that felt hot against his scales. He tore the chamber apart, roaring. But when dawn broke, the walls still whispered. And the high predator realized, the humans weren't even here. The fear was inside him. Inside all of them. By the time the next council gathered, the galaxy already smelled it. Allies circled. Enemies sharpened knives. The Koru Empire trembled, not from outside fleets, but from something much simpler. They had discovered prey that turned pain into power. And now every predator in the stars had to wonder. What happens when that kind of prey decides to hunt? The council tried to answer, claws rattling against stone, voices shrill with forced bravado. But their words cut off as alarms screamed. Not from orbit. Not from the skies. From deep inside the fortress itself. Something had breached the heart of their capital. And in the static that followed, the comms carried one sound. A whisper, jagged, broken, yet unstoppable. We don't stop. The alarms rolled like thunder through the Koru capital. Crimson light spilled down the fortress walls, claws clattered in panic, and soldiers swarmed the corridors with blades drawn. But they were chasing ghosts. The breach alarms howled from the lowest levels, then from the highest spires, then from the vaults. Each time soldiers rushed in, they found nothing but smoke and silence. Until the whispers started. First one guard. Then another. A muttered phrase carried through comms, repeating over and over, too faint to trace, too steady to erase. We don't stop. Commanders barked for discipline, but their voices were thin now. Every soldier knew the fortress had never fallen, never even been touched by an enemy claw. Yet somehow, prey had slipped inside their heart. Somewhere in those endless halls, humans were moving. The high predator descended into the council chamber, fury cloaking his fear. Flood the fortress, he ordered. Purge every level. Burn it until nothing breathes. And so they did. Fire cannons roared, poison gas flooded, steel melted into rivers. The screams of thousands of slaves filled the air, smothered into silence. When the smoke cleared, the fortress stood scarred but unbroken. The Koru exhaled. Perhaps the nightmare was over. Then the first body was found. A commander, crucified against a wall with his own armor, his jaws forced into a rictus grin. Above him, scrawled in blood. We don't stop. The fortress descended into madness. Soldiers refused to patrol alone. Captains muttered about spirits. More bodies appeared hanging in spires, wedged in ducts, always left like warnings. The high predator raged, demanding proof of infiltration. But no humans were ever caught alive. Only corpses. Only whispers. Outside the capital, the empire trembled. Fleets burned human worlds to glass, yet still survivors crawled out, scarred and singing. Other species watched. Chains rattled. Revolts began to spark. The myth of the humans grew faster than the fire meant to erase them. The Koru called them vermin, plague, rot. But the words rang hollow, because vermin do not learn to bleed ships dry from the inside. Plague does not smile when burned alive. And rot does not whisper in the dark until predators wake screaming. One fleet commander, desperate to prove dominance, staged a spectacle. He dragged 100 human captives into the arena of Vair, before 100,000 Koru. The humans were broken, burned, half-starved. Easy prey. He threw them into the pit with war beasts, hulking monsters bred to tear apart armored soldiers. The crowd roared. The beasts charged. And the humans did not run. They tore strips of metal from the ground, broke bones against stone to forge jagged weapons, and screamed as one. The beasts ripped into them, shattering bodies. Limbs snapped. Blood poured. Yet even as they fell, they clung to the monsters' throats, driving steel into eyes, tearing tendons with teeth. One by one the beasts collapsed, choking on blood. The humans died beside them, every last one broken. But when the dust cleared, the arena floor was filled with corpses of beasts twice their size. And the crowd was silent. Silent, until one voice in the stands whispered the words, "We don't stop." Others joined. Louder. A wave rolling through the arena. Until the entire coliseum of predators chanted the creed of their prey. The commander tried to roar them down, but his own soldiers turned their eyes on him with something worse than rebellion. With doubt. That was when the empire cracked. Slave revolts erupted across the stars. Chains shattered. Garrisons burned. Everywhere the chant followed. Not just from humans now, but from species who had never dared to resist. The humans had given them a language of defiance. A rhythm of survival. And the Koru, for the first time in memory, were on the defensive. The council met in secret chambers, claws trembling. They argued extermination had failed. Fear was spreading faster than fire. What could stop prey that refused to die? The high predator gave the only answer left. Then we erase not their bodies, but their spirit. His plan was monstrous even by Koru standards. Take a human alive. Break it so completely that the galaxy would see the truth: pain is not fuel. Pain is death. The council agreed. 1,000 hunters were dispatched to seize a single human survivor. They scoured the ruins of burned colonies, stalked battlefields still smoking. Finally, on the wreck of a shattered freighter, they found her. She was half dead already. Burns down her arms. One eye gone. Breathing like glass cracking. Perfect. They dragged her in chains to the capital, paraded her before the council, and broadcast the event across the empire. The high predator stood over her, claws gleaming, voice like stone. Your kind feeds on suffering. Let all who watch see the lie. Let pain consume you until nothing remains. And before billions of eyes, the breaking began. They shattered her bones. They flayed her skin. They drowned her in light and dragged her back choking. They carved her piece by piece until she was more wound than flesh. The chamber filled with Koru roars of triumph. Look, they thought. Look how weak your symbol is. Look how pain finally breaks her. The humans had lulled. Blood bubbled in her throat. And then she laughed. A dry, broken rasp that cut through every roar, every cheer, every lie. The translator crackled, struggling to shape the words. We don't stop. The chamber fell silent. The high predator froze, claw hovering mid-strike. The council stared, trembling. Because she was smiling through the ruin of her face. And in that moment, every Koru watching understood the horror. They could break her body into dust, and she would still crawl forward in spirit. Pain was not their weapon. It was hers. The crowd erupted, not in triumph, but in panic. Soldiers clawed at exits. Commanders screamed. And somewhere deep in the capital, alarms blared again. Because while every eye had been fixed on the spectacle, something else had moved. Koru's systems were failing. Vaults cracked. Prison doors opening. The human was not alone. She had been bait. And now, in the heart of the Koru Empire, the cages were empty. The cages opened with a groan that echoed through the bones of the fortress. Doors rusted shut for centuries were torn wide. Chains fell. Thousands of prisoners stumbled into the dark, broken bodies, scarred faces, eyes that had forgotten hope. Until they heard it. The laugh. The woman in the council chamber still rasping through blood, still smiling as the predators struck her. Her voice spilled through every comb, every corridor, every ear. We don't stop. The words spread like fire. The freed slaves repeated them, first as whispers, then as screams. The fortress shook with the rhythm, voices colliding into a chant that hammered the walls. The Koru garrison scrambled. Soldiers flooded into the lower vaults, blades drawn, poison vents opening. But the prisoners did not scatter. They surged forward, wielding rusted chains, jagged stone, their bare hands. They met armored predators head-on, letting claws tear into them, because every wound made their grip tighter, every scream sharpened their strike. The fortress descended into chaos. In the council chamber, a high predator bellowed for the broadcast to be cut. Technicians slammed claws on consoles, but every system flickered with static. The human's broken face filled every screen in the empire. Billions of eyes watched her bleed. Billions heard her laugh. And when her voice gave out, the chant of the freed thundered in its place. We don't stop. Across the capital, the chant rolled like a storm. Slaves in the streets rose. Servants in spires turned on their masters. The predator's own homeworld cracked open from within. The high predator roared for his soldiers to hold the line. This is our world. They are vermin. But vermin do not topple fortresses. Vermin do not choke the halls with predator corpses. Vermin do not sing as they die. The Koru fought with fury. Claws ripped, firestorm cannons roared, the streets ran black with blood. Entire districts burned. Yet the humans and the freed did not retreat. They dragged predators down into the fire with them. One soldier screamed as a human with both legs broken clawed up his chest, teeth snapping through his throat. Another watched in horror as prisoners set themselves alight and hurled their burning bodies into fuel stores, detonating half a spire. The Empire's heart was eating itself alive. The High Predator tried to flee to his palace spire. But the shadows followed him. Every corridor he passed carried the same sound, echoing through vents and ducts. "We don't stop." His guards faltered. Some turned back. Some dropped weapons. He struck them down himself, howling, but the fear was a contagion now. And the humans were no longer just fighting. They were hunting. The capital sky split with explosions. Dockyards burned as captured warships rose under human hands. Predator banners fell from spires. The Empire's own fleet fired on its capital, desperate to purge the infection before it spread further. But it was already too late. Other species, chained for centuries, saw the broadcasts. Saw humans broken, laughing, rising through fire. Saw the predators bleed in their own throne world. And something long buried sparked alive. Hope. Riots erupted across a dozen worlds. Chains shattered in mines, in pits, in factories. The Koru Empire felt its grip slip with every hour. And at the center of it, in the burning capital, the woman who had been meant to break still lived. She was carried on the shoulders of other prisoners, her body mangled, her voice raw, but her smile unbroken. When the High Predator finally cornered her in the wreckage of the council chamber, his armor scorched, his claws dripping, he expected her to beg. Instead, she looked up at him through blood-matted hair and whispered one word. "Closer." Confused, he leaned in just as the floor beneath them roared. Humans and slaves had tunneled into the chamber walls, packed them with fuel cells, and set the charges. The last thing the High Predator saw was her smile. The chamber erupted. The explosion tore the fortress in half, fire spilling into the night sky. Towers collapsed, streets split open, shockwaves leveling spires. The heart of the Koru Empire was reduced to a crater of fire and smoke. From orbit, fleets watched their own capital fall. Commanders trembled. Soldiers wept. And then the signal cut through the static once more. Not one voice. Thousands. Broken, scarred, defiant. "We don't stop." The Empire's heart was gone. The Predator's pride shattered. And still, the humans crawled out of the flames. Burning. Bleeding. Smiling. The chant carried across the stars. And in the silence that followed, every predator species in the galaxy began to wonder. If this is what humans are in their beginning, what will they become in the end? The crater of the Koru capital still smoked when the first revolts ignited across the Empire. On the mining moons of Vare, slaves rose with drills and torches, chanting in the dark. On the water worlds of Halor, chained swimmers dragged their masters into the depths, singing through the bubbles. On 1,000 forgotten outposts, voices rose in unison, repeating the words carried from the burning heart of the Empire. "We don't stop." The Koru struck back with fire and steel. Fleets surged from the docks, claws tearing through rebellious worlds. They burned cities. They salted soil. They made examples. But something had changed. Every act of cruelty no longer terrified. It inflamed. Pain was no longer a leash, it was a match. The more the predators struck, the louder the chant grew. And humans were at the center of it. They were scattered across battlefields, hiding in tunnels, bleeding in cages. But everywhere they appeared, resistance sharpened. They were proof living and dying that pain was not defeat. One shattered colony fought for a month inside the ruins of its own streets. Koru's soldiers swore the humans there had been buried alive 10 times, yet still crawled out, eyes burning. In the end, when the fleet glassed the world from orbit, the last transmission was not begging, it was laughter. Another time, a slave transport was torn open by human hands mid-flight. Survivors hurled themselves into vacuum rather than surrender, pulling their captors with them. The predators called it madness. Other species called it courage. The myth grew. The Koru Council, what was left of it, declared a new strategy. Containment. Isolation. Break their image before it spreads further. But the image was already out. Fugitives scrawled it on walls. Slaves whispered it in chains. Soldiers heard it in their dreams. The words had become more than defiance. They were prophecy. We don't stop. The predators began to crack under the weight of it. Soldiers marched slower. Claws trembled before battle. Commanders executed deserters by the thousands, but it didn't matter. Fear had become a second army. And still, the humans were evolving. They learned to fight in the dark, in the smoke, in the acid storms of ruined worlds. They carved weapons out of wreckage, ships out of scrap. Pain taught them faster than any academy. Where Koru fleets swept, they followed, not with force, but with persistence. Strike. Bleed. Fall. Rise again. They did not need victory in battles. Their victory was in surviving. Every wound became a banner. Every scar, a lesson. The predators began to whisper a word they had never used before. Unkillable. One Koru fleet commander, desperate to prove otherwise, ordered the capture of a human strike cell. They were dragged into interrogation pits, burned, drowned, torn apart. But the last survivor carved a message into her own flesh before dying. You will run out of claws before we run out of blood. The guards refused to touch her body. That was when something even worse began. It wasn't just humans now. Other species took up the chant. Fragile, broken, long enslaved, suddenly they fought with a new fury. They let themselves be cut and burned, screaming the words through bloodied teeth. They fought past limits their bodies should have allowed. They had learned from the humans. The predators were not facing one enemy. They were facing an idea. And ideas don't bleed. The high predator tried to rally his people. What remained of his council stood with him in the half-ruined palace, clawing at pride. We are hunters, he growled. The galaxy is ours. No prey survives against us. But his soldiers would not meet his gaze. Because as he spoke, alarms sounded again. Another world had fallen. Another garrison burned. Another fleet fled into silence. And above it all, carried through the static, was the whisper. We don't stop. The high predator slammed his claws into stone, scales cracking with fury. Then we end them all. Burn every world they touch, salt every sky. Let the galaxy drown in fire before we bow to vermin. And so began the Scorch campaign. Entire sectors burned. Whole systems were gutted. Planets turned black. The predators howled their triumph into the void, sure that now, finally, the myth would die with the ashes. But then, from the ruins, voices rose again. Scarred, broken, crawling through soot and blood, the humans survived. The freed carried them. They carried each other. And still they sang. We don't stop. The predators had unleashed hell. But hell had learned to crawl. The Scorch campaign faltered. Commanders realized they could not kill fast enough. That every massacre only lit another fire. That they were feeding the very myth they sought to erase. And the humans were beginning to gather. Not scattered cells. Not whispers. Armies. Worn, bloodied, carrying scars like banners, but armies nonetheless. They had ships now, stitched from wreckage, flying on fire and fury. They had weapons, torn from predator claws and reforged in desperation. And they had something no predator had ever needed. Endurance. The predators could not comprehend it. War was supposed to be decisive. Swift. Clean. But this was not war. This was erosion. A grind of teeth on bone. A refusal to end. And for the first time in their history, the Koru looked to the stars and felt hunted. The High Predator demanded the fleet's rally for one final strike. We will drown them in claws and fire. Break them before they gather further. But even as he spoke, his officers' eyes shifted. Their scales twitched. They remembered the laughter. The scars. The chant that followed them into dreams. And in the silence of that chamber, one truth clawed its way into every predator's mind. The humans were not rising. They were already here. Everywhere. Every wound, every scar, every scream had been preparation. And the predators had given it to them. The council chamber lights flickered. A static crackled through the combs. Then, faint, broken, unstoppable. We don't stop. The predators thought the humans would always be fragments. A scream here, a riot there, sparks that burned out quickly. They never believed fragments could gather into fire. Then came the Battle of Orus Belt. It began with silence. A mining ring at the edge of nowhere, held by a small predator garrison. Routine. Forgettable. Until the humans arrived. Not one ship. Not a scavenged freighter or stolen raider. But dozens. Then hundreds. Hulks stitched together from wreckage. Spires of scrap turned into spears. Engines whining with death rattles. The Koru commander laughed when sensors lit. Garbage. They've brought a graveyard to fight us. Then the graveyard opened fire. Rust and fury rained from the sky. Scrap cannons tore through shields. Suicide rams split predator hulls. Every explosion birthed two more strikes. The predators returned fire, shredding human ships by the score. But something was wrong. They kept coming. Hull breaches vented entire crews, yet the ships did not fall back. Fires gutted decks, yet cannons still roared. One predator vessel reported humans literally chaining themselves to controls, blood freezing on consoles, grins on their faces as they rammed headlong into armored cruisers. The commander's laughter curdled into silence. This was no raid. This was an army. Across the belt, the humans surged. And with them, not just humans, freed from 100 species, fighting alongside. Weak bodies, fragile bones, but eyes lit with the same fire. They moved with human rhythm. They fought with human grit. They bled without fear. The predators found themselves drowning in bodies that refused to die. A Koru captain screamed across comms, "They fight as if pain is pleasure," before static swallowed his words. Another reported boarding parties clawing through breaches, humans fighting without suits in vacuum, eyes bulging, teeth red, still tearing predators apart before their lungs collapsed. The fleet began to panic. And then, the final revelation came. In the heart of the human flotilla, rising from wreckage like a ghost, was a single ship patched together from predator parts, carrying scars of 100 battles. Its hull was scrawled with words in a dozen tongues, painted in blood and ash. At its prow, the human woman who had laughed in chains stood again. Scarred beyond recognition, her body rebuilt from pain, her voice raw but unbroken. She spoke once more, her words carried across every channel, across every battlefield. "You thought pain made us weak. You thought it broke us. But pain made us. It fed us. And now..." Her voice cracked into laughter, carried by the chorus of thousands. "Now it will kill you." The fleet broke. Predator cruisers scattered, discipline snapping like brittle bone. Ships rammed each other in desperate retreats. Whole squadrons mutinied, refusing to face the graveyard again. The Battle of Oris Belt was not just a fight. It was a declaration. The humans were no longer scattered. They were united. Word spread faster than fire. Across the galaxy, species that had whispered rebellion now roared it. Chains shattered in sync. Armies rose. And at their center, always, were the humans, bleeding, laughing, unstoppable. The predators tried to contain the story. To paint it as madness, as vermin gone rabid. But the more they spoke, the more fear leaked through their voices. Because deep down, they knew the truth. They were no longer hunters. They were prey. The High Predator himself felt it. In the council chamber, silence clung to his officers like rot. He roared for them to speak, to plan, to fight, but their eyes shifted, and he saw it. The tremor of fear. The whisper of words none dared say aloud. "We don't stop." The humans were becoming more than soldiers. They were becoming gravity, bending the galaxy toward them. Every scar was a star. Every wound, a map. The predators had unleashed something that could not be chained again. And when the High Predator slammed his claws into the map table, eyes blazing, he realized the worst truth of all. This was only the beginning. Because for the first time in history, the galaxy had seen what humanity looked like when it bled together. And it was beautiful. The woman's voice crackled across comms one last time as the Predator fleet collapsed into retreat, words carried like a scar across the stars. "We don't stop. Not until you do." And in the silence that followed, the predators of the galaxy, all of them, not just the Koru, understood what that meant. The war was no longer about territory. Or slaves. Or conquest. It was about survival. Theirs. The predators gathered everything. Every ship still loyal. Every claw still sharp. Every fragment of their once proud empire. The High Predator himself declared it, "We end this infestation now. One strike. One firestorm. Nothing left to rise again. And so they came. A fleet so vast it blotted out stars, engines snarling like beasts in the dark. From the fortress worlds of the Koru, from the scorched colonies, from the broken remnants of their vassals, they assembled a storm. The humans saw it coming. Their scouts whispered of the massing ships, the endless lines of hulls. Any other species would have despaired. The humans only smiled. When the fleet arrived above the ruined moon of Thraxis, they found the humans waiting. Not in polished ships. Not in ranks of steel. But in ragged flotillas, scarred and bleeding, patched with the bones of old battles. The high predator laughed when he saw them. This is all they have? Wreckage? Scraps? Then let us bury them under true war. The sky tore open. Predator cannons roared, 1,000 suns burning at once. Worlds cracked, oceans boiled, entire cities vaporized in the first volley. The humans were flung apart like ash in the wind. The predators howled their triumph. And then the humans came back. Ships venting flames still fired. Broken hulls rammed through cruisers. Crews with no air clawed into predator decks, eyes bursting, hands drenched in blood, dragging their enemies into vacuum with them. Every loss was fuel. Every scarred wreck became a weapon. Every scream became a song. The predators poured fire into them. They died in millions. But they did not stop. The high predator snarled from his flagship. Why won't they break? His claws split the console, eyes wild. They should be gone. But as the battle raged, he began to see the truth. The humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting to endure. Every hour they survived, more of his fleet faltered. Every scar they carried, his soldiers saw. Every body they threw into fire, his captains felt. Fear bled through his command like poison. Crews muttered. Gunners hesitated. The chant returned in their heads, that whisper from the burning capital. We don't stop. The high predator roared for silence. He ordered his fleets deeper, closer, to drown them in sheer weight. And that was when the humans revealed their trap. From the shattered surface of their axis, engines roared. They had buried ships and the planet itself, hidden in tunnels carved with blood and fire. As the predator fleets closed, the surface erupted, spewing human warships into the heart of their formation. Predator cruisers buckled under suicide rams. Dreadnoughts cracked as swarms of scavenged fighters tore through them, their pilots already dead but their ships still burning forward. The battle became slaughter on both sides. But one side had expected to survive. The other had expected to endure. And endurance was winning. A predator captain screamed across calms, begging to retreat. Another turned his guns on his own fleet, desperate to escape the humans clawing through his decks. Mutiny spread like fire through the fleet. The high predator struck down his own officers as they fled. His voice thundered across channels, "Fight! You are hunters! Kill them!" But in his heart, even he felt it, the cold hand closing around his species. Because as the battle dragged into its third day, the humans still fought. Ships torn in half still rammed forward. Crews torn to bone still pulled triggers. Soldiers with nothing but their teeth still killed. And the predators, mighty and armored, began to falter. They were bleeding out against an enemy that refused to end. The high predator stared at the burning void, at fleets reduced to carcasses, at his empire's pride scattered into fire. And then his screens flickered. Through static, one image cut through. Her face again. The scarred woman. The one who had laughed in chains. Her eyes burned through the screen as if she could see him. Her voice was ragged, torn by smoke and blood. You thought this would end us. You thought fire would break us. But fire is air to us. Pain is our feast. You are only feeding us. The calms erupted with human laughter, broken, bloody, unstoppable. The high predator felt his throat close. For the first time in his long life, he knew the shape of fear. And then, from the ruined human ships, a chorus rose, carried across the dying battlefield. We don't stop. The words drowned out the screams. Drowned out the fire. Drowned out the silence of broken fleets. And in that moment, every predator understood. They could kill 1 million. Burn 1 billion. Shatter worlds. But they could never stop them. The battle of their axis was not won by humans. It was survived by them. And survival was enough. The predators fled. The great fleet broke apart, not in strategy but in terror. Vessels vanished into the dark, captains deserting, soldiers mutinying, the Empire's last strength scattering into dust. The humans floated among the wreckage, scarred, broken, laughing. They had bled. They had burned. They had been torn to bone. And still, they were here. The high predator's flagship drifted, hull ruptured, engines dead. He staggered through smoke and blood, staring at the burning void. And for the first time in his life, he whispered the words aloud. We don't stop. Not in mockery. In fear. The fleet of their axis never returned. Wreckage drifted for months, blackened hulls gnawed by gravity and silence. Of the thousands of predator warships sent to end humanity, only a handful limped back, their crews broken, their eyes hollow. And with their retreat, the Empire fractured. Worlds that had cowered under the Koru banner for centuries suddenly remembered their claws. Slave revolts spread like infection. Colonies sealed their skies, refusing orders. Even vassals once loyal began to turn, quietly at first, then openly. The predators who had mocked humanity as vermin now found themselves alone. Their fleets bled fuel and fear. Their armies staggered under the weight of desertion. And the humans came for them. Not as polished conquerors. Not as saviors draped in banners. But as shadows in the ruins, scars moving through fire. On worlds the predators thought loyal, whispers spread before nightfall. By dawn, the humans were there dragging chains, bearing wounds, smiling through broken teeth. They struck not to hold ground, but to haunt it. Garrisons vanished overnight. Officers woke to find their crews gone, their weapons turned against them. It was not conquest. It was hunting. For the first time, the predators knew the taste of their own medicine. Doors they had kicked down for centuries now swung inward on them. Cages they had filled were waiting when they arrived. Tortures they had perfected were mirrored back, not for cruelty, but for justice. One commander was found with the words carved into his chest, deep and ragged, letters written in his own blood. We don't stop. Another was dragged through the streets by freed slaves, his armor split, his roar drowned by the chant that echoed through every alley. We don't stop. The galaxy was shifting. Species that had once bowed low now stood taller, bloodied but unbroken. They fought with human rhythm, with human stubbornness, with human grit. They had learned to eat pain. And the predators were starving. Their supply lines snapped. Their fleets dwindled. Entire planets turned into graveyards where once they had ruled. The High Predator stalked the ruins of his palace, claws dragging against shattered stone. He had survived their axis, but only barely. His once great council was gone, his fleets scattered, his empire bleeding out with every sunrise. Still he raged. "We are hunters," he roared to the silence of empty halls. "The galaxy belongs to us." But the silence did not answer. In that silence, he heard the truth, the chant, the laughter, the whispers that had haunted him since the capital burned. "We don't stop." The words had spread beyond humans now. They belonged to the galaxy. Entire armies of freed species fought under it. Entire fleets painted it across their hulls. Entire worlds screamed it into the void. The predators had built their empire on fear. But fear had changed sides. Soldiers deserted in droves. Captains vanished into exile. Families clawed at ships, fleeing to hidden systems. The mighty Koru, who had once chained galaxies, were reduced to refugees. And still the humans hunted. Not because they needed to. Not because they sought empires of their own. But because they remembered every scar. On one world, humans rose from the ashes of their own burned colony, eyes hollow, voices raw. They marched into the predator garrison unarmed. The predators laughed, drew blades, and froze when the humans kept walking. They tore through steel with bare hands, let blades split skin, let claws pierce bone. But they did not fall. They did not even slow. The predators broke before them, fleeing into the wilds, hunted by those they had once ruled. On another world, a predator governor tried to rally his forces with fire and speeches. He looked out over the city square, shouting, "They are vermin. They will break." But in the crowd, a scarred child stood. Human. Silent. Smiling. The governor faltered. His voice cracked. Because in that smile, he saw the future. The crowd surged. And the governor's words drowned beneath the chant. "We don't stop." The Koru Empire was collapsing not with a final battle, but with 1,000 cuts. With every scar that refused to fade. With every whisper that became a scream. The High Predator knew it. He watched reports come in of one more lost fleet, one more burning colony, one more defection. His claws shook. His eyes burned. He had been raised to believe prey always dies. That predators always win. Now he watched prey hunt. He watched predators fall silent. And in the quiet of his shattered throne room, with his empire bleeding out beyond the walls, he felt something colder than fear. He felt the end. Because the humans were not stopping. They had never stopped. And the galaxy was following them into the fire. The Koru Empire died quietly. Not with banners lowered, not with parades or treaties, but with silence. Silence in its fleets, mutinied and adrift. Silence in its colonies, once loud with command, now filled with the chants of the freed. Silence in its throne world, where the palace stood gutted, its spires melted into slag. Only one voice remained. The High Predator. He sat in the hollow of his throne, scales cracked, armor scorched, claws dulled to stubs. His empire was gone, yet he still whispered to himself, "We are hunters. We are eternal." But the words rang hollow in the stone. Outside, the night sky burned with wreckage. Human ships, scarred and stitched from centuries of war, hung above the ruins like ghosts. Beneath them, an army marched, humans and freed alike, scarred, broken, unbowed. They came not with trumpets or banners. They came with silence. The High Predator felt that silence before he saw them. Heavy, suffocating, endless. It pressed against his chest harder than any blade. And then they entered. The scarred woman led them, the one who had laughed in chains, the one whose voice had carried across the galaxy. She walked with a limp, her body a map of wounds, her eyes burning. The High Predator snarled when he saw her. "You should be dead. You should all be dead." She said nothing. Her silence was sharper than any claw. The predators had always mocked silence and prey, called it weakness, fear, surrender. Now, standing before her, he understood the truth. Silence was not weakness. It was judgment. The woman stopped at the foot of his throne. The army behind her stood still, their breaths a single rhythm, their scars lit like stars. The High Predator tried to rise, to summon the old roar, the voice that once shook empires. But the sound cracked in his throat. His knees gave way. For the first time in his life, he bowed. "Kill me," he spat. "End it. Prove you are hunters after all." The woman leaned close. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "We are not hunters." The words hit him harder than any blade. "We are the prey you could not kill." Her hand closed on his jaw. Not in hatred. Not in rage. In finality. She forced his gaze upward, toward the burning sky where the empire had once stretched. And she whispered the words that had haunted him since the first chain broke. "We don't stop." The chamber erupted. Not in sound, but in silence. The army behind her stood, unflinching, as the High Predator's roar turned into a whimper. His claws scrabbled at the stone, his eyes wide as the truth swallowed him. It was not humanity that had destroyed his empire. It was pain itself, fed, carried, endured, reborn. The woman let him go. He crumpled to the floor, gasping, shaking, staring at the army that did not need to strike him. His empire was already gone. His people already broken. His fear already complete. And in the end, it was not claws or fire that ended the Koru. It was silence. The silence of prey that would not die. The silence of scars that outlived empires. The silence of humanity, standing unbroken in the ruins. When the last breath left the High Predator's throat, the woman turned, her army with her. They did not cheer. They did not sing. They marched back into the night, leaving the throne empty, the palace hollow, the galaxy forever changed. And across the stars, whispered by billions, the words carried on. "We don't stop. Not when the chains close. Not when the fires burn. Not when the hunters come. We don't stop." And in the silence that followed, the galaxy finally understood what it had birthed. Not conquerors. Not hunters. Something far worse. A species that eats pain.